Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you on this Friday, which is actually another interview. I got kind of double booked for several weeks in February, which is very cool, but it means there's going to be lots of interviews, which I am totally okay with. It also means that there's lots of extra books to read, which I'm also okay with, if only I could add a few more hours into each day. That would be cool. Hey, if I could do that just to read in general, that would be cool. But just giving you a heads up that we have a few extra interviews coming up in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully you're like me and you're like, cool, more authors to check out, because that is really what it boils down to. More authors to check out, more genres, more books that you may want to put on your to-be-read list. So today's author is Nancy Joie Wilkie. She has a debut book of short stories called 7 Sides of Self. It's got such fabulous alliteration. We talk a little bit about it in the interview, but the stories in 7 Sides of Self explore the various sides of one's personality: the storyteller, the skeptic, the survivor, the saint or the sinner, the scholar, the seeker, and the savior. Through the lives of central characters such as Zarsi son Diago, Sister Othrosa Vela, Jarka Musha, and Old Mims, Nancy Joie Wilkie explores themes of battling strong emotions, the lengths we might go to for self-preservation and self-sacrifice, the inability to accept difference, and taking responsibility for what we create in pieces that inhabit the worlds of both sci-fi and fantasy. Original and thought-provoking, these are stories that will stimulate the intellect and engage the imagination. And that is the description of the book 7 Sides of Self by Nancy Joie Wilkie. 7 short stories, so that is the 7 Sides of Self. Each one has a subtitle that also starts with S. So again, I do love me some alliteration, as you know if you're a regular listener. And these also have another S word, science fiction. So there's some science fiction and fantasy elements to some of the stories, not all of them. There are some artistic elements in some of the stories, not all of them. There's a couple of characters who are writers. Each story is a standalone story, so you can, that's one of the nice things about a book of short stories. You can sit down when you don't have a huge amount of time to read, and you can read a complete story in a short amount of time. But there are some definite connections, definite crossovers in a way in these stories. You can still read them independently. You don't have to read them in any particular order, but you're going to notice some themes throughout this. And there's a couple of names that appear in more than one story, and a couple of themes. So I thought that was kind of fun. It's sort of like looking for Easter eggs in your favorite movie, right? Or your favorite series. And that's how I felt with this book. So let's go ahead now and turn to the interview. Before we do that, I do have copies of this book to give away. So if you are interested in reading some short stories, then stay tuned until the end of the podcast to find out how you can enter to win that giveaway. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and turn now to the interview with Nancy Joie Wilkie. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. We are here to talk about your new book, 7 Sides of Self. Before we get to the book, though, if you could share a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
I would be happy to. I was thinking about this earlier today, and I'll try and keep it short. I was a Navy brat, so I moved all over the place, and finally ended up here in Maryland by the time I was 13. Managed to get through a couple of years here without moving, and then, as one might figure out from one of my stories, I did go to college in North Carolina and spent then 21 years at a biotech firm and got laid off because we got bought out, and spent the last part of my career working at the NIH for the federal government's biodefense program. And pretty much the whole time I was a project manager. I seemed to be able to manage people and money and getting things done on time and on budget. That's my superpower. But that's not what I really wanted to do. I always wanted to be a writer, a musician, and an artist. And so I retired early. That's what I've been doing pretty much for the last 9.5 years is that when I'm not taking care of an elderly mother and a handicapped brother. And that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, it sounds pretty fascinating. I know there are some people that are both scientific and artistic, but not everybody has both of those sides. So that is very cool.
You would be amazed how many science friends I have that are also musicians. It's amazing, and I just think that's because music is math. And
yeah, I was just gonna say. Yeah. So, as I said, the book is called 7 Sides of Self. It is a collection of 7 short stories. So, can you give a little bit of an overview of the book?
Yeah, I'll tell you something. These stories were written over a span of about 25 years, and they were written just as single short stories. And it was about 10 years ago where all of a sudden I thought, I really ought to take all these stories and put them together. But I really couldn't figure out how to do it. And then one sunny summer day in North Carolina, it struck me, and that's where the 7 Sides of Self title came from. The muses showed up one day and gave me all the structure and the ideas and the subtitles with all the S's, and so it was more of a looking in at these stories with a different set of eyes and realizing that they were all really allegorical pictures of me. The title is somewhat deceiving. I tell my friends the title really should be 7 Sides of Me, because most of the main characters are actually me in disguise, and that allows me to explore some aspect of me that I wouldn't normally, nobody would care about it if I was writing as myself. So I create the characters, create the fictitious world, and deal with the issue, whatever it might be. And so, yeah, I was looking at your question earlier, and I was thinking stories came first, the title came second, and the subtitles came third. And so, yeah, the titles were very purposefully constructed after the fact. It wasn't the other way around. It wasn't title, subtitles, and then stories. So, yeah, okay. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I had, for those who, don't have the questions before them, I had asked you about the alliteration, and because I love alliteration. And so it's 7 Sides of Self, and each story also starts with an S. They're all titled. So like there's the Seeker, and wow, that's the only one I can remember off the top of my head. That's terrible.
The Survivor, the Scholar, the...
Thank you. Yes. So you said they came to you separately, but and they are all standalone. You can read them independent of one another. But can you also talk about how they are connected in some ways?
Yeah, it's kind of weird, because after I put them together, it was then that I did realize that they were a little bit connected. There's actually one set of stories revolves around the lives of authors, and are, I suppose, somewhat loosely connected, and that's the first story, which is called There Once Was a Man. Once was a man who wanted to write, and then Microwave Man, which is the third story, and that's about an author who goes off on an adventure. And then the last story is called Old Mims, and it's about an author in his last years and what he's trying to do to make amends with the characters he's created. So that's kind of one set. They're not directly connected, but the main character is an author in each case. The second set is there's two stories, and they both take place in the far future, probably on some distant planet somewhere. And that's the second story and the fourth story, called The Ledge and An Intricate Balance. And those stories pretty much is where I introduce the concept of mother souls and the oversoul, which is just an allegorical way of saying God and some sort of nuns or religious order of women. And then there are two other stories, the last two stories, Journey to Pradix and Old Mims, which both portray sort of different ways of looking at a transition to an afterlife. And then there's one story in the middle that is called Of the Green and of the Gold. That's kind of the longer story, and that is loosely connected with Microwave Man. Microwave Man's sort of a prequel to that, but again, it's a very loose connection. So the idea is that these were never designed to be connected, and it's sort of strictly by sheer dumb accident they actually end up being that way. But I do plan to introduce more stories that are more connected to each other and more connected to some of what I've already done here.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm glad you're going to do some more stories because maybe it'll answer some of the questions that I had about some of the characters.
Right.
You never know. Let's go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. Before we get to the break, I do want to apologize for two things. One, my scratchy throat. Again, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you know that I have sinus issues, and the sinus infection has once again reared its ugly head. I wonder if I should name them like hurricanes. Anyway, so I'm a little scratchy, a little stuffy today. And also we are having some internet connectivity issues at the studio, I guess. I did not realize during the time of recording, so I apologize that the quality is not always great during the recording. We are working on getting that fixed. Let's go ahead and take that first break. When we come back, we'll be talking about some of the genres involved in this represented in this book of short stories. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Nancy Joie Wilkie about her book, 7 Sides of Self. Let's go ahead and get back to that interview. There are also, so there's science fiction in that, you know, there's some stories that are off-world, set in the future. There's some spiritual aspects with the allegory of the afterlife. Can you talk about some of those? Can you talk about the spiritual components and how they interact with and influence the 7 themes of the stories?
Yeah, I would say that probably the last 2 of the stories, Journey to Pradix and Old Mims, are the ones that really are the most spiritual. But you know, somebody once asked me, and are any of these stories autobiographical? And the answer is, yeah, they are to a certain extent. And I think part of this is just a reflection of me being a pretty spiritual person and trying to just give a different look on how that spiritualness might be looked at, and specifically, one of the stories I'm working on now is how does the spirit, where does it come from? How does it get into your body? Where does it go after you're done with it, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just trying to use the whole allegorical theme as a way to look into stuff that people probably only really think about in church. And so some of the stories, although I don't know if they have much of a spiritual content to them. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So it's hard to say. But the idea again is just using allegory to talk about things. And somebody would also maybe mention that the fact that at the end of each story there's a Bible verse, and where does that come from? Years ago, I was in a not a nice place in life, and I was looking for some guidance on what to do and how to handle things. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'm going to look at the Bible, see what the Bible says. It's supposed to be a pretty smart book. And I went, found a verse, and I thought, okay, that's it. And I kind of did the same thing when I got done with one of these stories. And I thought, well, this is kind of an interesting thing. I wonder what the Bible has to say about this theme. And each story has a theme. And sure enough, every time I would go to the Bible, I would find a verse that would sort of exemplify what I was trying to say in the story. So that the Bible verses always came after the fact. And so, yeah, that's piqued a lot of curiosity, I must say. People wondered about that.
Actually, I was curious myself,
Yes.
wondering if you kind of started with the Bible verses or if they came after.
No.
So now I know that they did come
Yeah.
after, but it's kind of funny how those things work out sometimes, where you finish something and you go look for the perfect quote, or
Yeah.
be it from the Bible or somewhere else, and you're like, yep, there it is.
It's just what did I say here? It's meant somehow to show how the theme of the story might be looked at by a different set of eyes, i.e. the eyes of whoever wrote the particular Bible verse that I'm quoting. Yeah.
Mhm. Nice. Okay. And you said that, yeah, there are autobiographical elements in the book, that in some ways these are all stories about different parts of you.
Absolutely.
How did the various elements of your life, you mentioned, being a scientist, you're an artist, you're a musician, how did those aspects of you play into the stories and the themes?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's kind of a weird thing because it comes from a lot of different places. One of the things is the second story, The Ledge, is actually based on a dream I had that was all about my fear of heights, and so I dealt with my fear of heights by writing this story, and again in an allegorical way. And I'm the person that's caught up on a ledge and trying to figure out what to do when there's absolutely no way down that will ever get me down safely. So, but the thing about the science, I like, because was a scientist. I like to have my stories based with some degree of scientific relevance. And so I go looking for models in science, and the fourth story, An Intricate Balance, I came up with this concept of the laws of spiritual dynamics, or spiritual mechanics, I guess. And that's because I actually am from a family of scientists, and one of my ancestors was a fellow by the name of William Thomson, who was also known as Lord Kelvin, who helped write the third law of thermodynamics. And so I came up with this law of spiritual dynamics, or spiritual mechanics, to help explain how souls move in and out of bodies. And so, yeah. And then the whole thing about three of the stories having authors as the main character is, again, because I have a lot of cousins who are writers, and they're all older, and they were kind of my inspiration. So yeah, the science is kind of what I grew up with, the music, the art, and the writing, or because I've got grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins that were all into that kind of stuff. And I just thought that was a very cool thing to want to do. And so the bottom line, though, is all of those different things, science, artists, musicians, writers, they're all trying to take something that they've thought about or they felt and bring it out into the real world. And so that's actually kind of where I get the term Mindsights from, which is my website, mindsights.net. And that's my music, my art, and my writing. And that's pretty much what I try to do, is take what's in my head and my heart and get it out into the world and let other people see what's inside.
Interesting. And that made me think about the stories and how they, they're short stories. They don't always wrap up with a nice, neat bow, but they leave you kind of with a question. What do you hope that readers might take from the stories or the book as a whole?
Well, I think each story has a particular theme. If you had to distill everything down into just a few words, the first story is, I think, that we all in some way struggle to be creative and to be unique. And I think that's what that character was trying to look for, was a way to be creative. The second story is, again, the one about my fear of heights, and that we all face life-defining decisions. So this poor guy's stuck up on this ledge, and he's definitely got a life-defining decision to make. Third story, I think, is that we're all curious about whether there's somebody else out there up in space somewhere. And so I think that's what that character was finally figuring out, that that's what he was doing. The fourth one is this is a big one for me right now. This is the struggle between self-preservation and self-sacrifice. And the reason it's big is, as I mentioned earlier, I've been dealing with taking care of an elderly parent who is very, very much in need right now. And how much of myself do I give away to this person so that they have a better quality of life? But it's always giving at my own expense. So where do I draw the line and say enough is enough, and how much am I willing to give up for this other person? So that's a big one, and that's what that story is about. And I think that's probably the one story that causes people the most number of questions, because they don't quite figure out what it is I'm trying to prove in that story. But that's the deal. The fifth story is pretty much the main character wanting justice for all, which, if you've had somebody wrong you, that's what you're looking for. The sixth story is that we're all looking for some sort of certainty, I think, that there's something beyond the life that is right here in front of us. And then the last story is pretty much the theme there is that we all have a need to protect our children. And if they're hurting, we need to take care of them. So that's each. And the problem with writing a collection of short stories is there's no one simple answer. And, when people ask me to categorize the collection, it's really hard to do because they're all so different. So, yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I can only imagine that, people they want things wrapped up in a nice, neat bow usually. And
right.
So it's hard to say, well, that's not the way life often works.
No. And I did have somebody tell me that there seemed to be a bunch of people dying in here, and why is it always somebody's wife that's dying? And I said, well, until you pointed that out, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even realize that 2 or 3 of the stories have some guy's poor wife is either dying or is already dead or something. And it's like, I didn't mean to do that.
You're like the Disney of short stories. You know how Disney moms are always dead.
Yeah, good point.
Random, yes, but it's true. Well, a lot of Disney characters do not have moms. At any rate, let's go ahead and take our second break of the podcast. And when we come back, we'll, of course, have more with Nancy. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with Nancy Joie Wilkie about her book of short stories, 7 Sides of Self. Let's talk about your music also, because I know that's a big part of you, and I know it's, when you go to your website, it's on there. How long have you been musically inclined, and actually, how long have you been working on your music?
Well, it started with I was 10 years old when my dad forced me into studying an instrument in band. So that was over 50 years ago. And, as much as I hated it at the time, I'm so grateful that he did that. I'm so grateful that he took the time to teach me about, time signatures and jazz. Because he was a trumpet player when he was young. And then I guess at about 14, which means I'm just about ready to celebrate my 50th anniversary with guitar and piano. And self-taught guitar and piano, and have been playing both for that long, which is a scary thought. And always wanted to be in a band, and didn't ever get to be in a band till I was 40, and was finally joined a couple of coworkers at the biotech firm and did a cover band, and that was cool for a couple of years, and then that broke up. And then in about 1999, I guess, I met somebody who was in the process of recording a CD of original music, and they found out I played acoustic guitar, and so I started playing guitar with this person for 6 years, and we did after we finished her CD, we did a group CD, and that really was what I wanted to do. I thought, oh my God, this is so awesome to write your own music, to perform your own music, and to record it. And then life got tough for a couple of years. I got laid off. I lost my dad, and having to take care of my nieces, and so. In 2008, I finally went out and bought a computer and software and set up a home studio and started writing and recording music. And so released my first CD in February of 2016, my second CD in March of 2017, my third one last year in April, and I'm just about done with my fourth one. Hopefully it'll get released next month. And there's music on that CD that is actually tied to these short stories, which makes it kind of unique, I think, that there's music specifically to match up with some of the stories, and there'll be a little blurb in the booklet that goes with the CD that talks about that and which stories the music, which songs go with. So I've been doing that, and it's an awful lot of fun. I think that's what I've been enjoying the most is that. And when I'm done with this, I'll get back to writing a little more regularly and get that done. So yeah.
Very cool. What type of music?
You can get my
do you like
CDs
to play?
on CD Baby, by the way. A little promotional.
Okay.
Thing there. Yep.
Yes. What kind of music do you play?
Well, that's another. Here, once again, people are asking me to define what I do, and the only thing that I can say that's short and sweet is original classic rock. I play a lot of music that is similar to what I heard in my late teen years, in my 20s and 30s. Back in the old days when there was the Beatles, the Who, Supertramp, Pink Floyd, Genesis, Moody Blues. All those were big influences, and so I think a lot of my songs on my last CD are similar to that. But I don't know, there's a little bit of edge to some of this in terms of use of synthesizers and stuff. It's not all acoustic music by any means. And because I don't sing, what I do is I have a lot of talented friends who are really good singers, and they'll come into my studio and they'll sing for me. And so the fact that on this last CD there's 9 songs, but there's 4 different singers, that some people don't seem to mind that. Some people are bothered by the fact that there's not one singer on all the songs, and that's just the way it goes. Sorry about that.
Right, you can't make everybody happy.
But again, these CDs, they all have their little efforts to come up with some sort of unifying theme. The first one is a lot about just the first one's almost all instrumental, by the way, and it's almost me just sort of doing an instrumental take on the beauty of the day and a lot of nature kind of stuff. The second one is much more about, I think, relationships, and the third one also is a little bit about relationships, but it's more about how relationships in life somehow don't end the way you always would like them to. People break up, you lose contact with people, or somebody dies or something, and so how do you process all that? And so and the way I can tell if I'm getting to somebody is I've had somebody, when I played my last CD for somebody, they were here listening to it, and at the end of one of the songs, she looked up at me and she almost had tears in her eyes. She said, "Those lyrics are absolutely, amazing." And I thought, you know what? If I can make somebody cry, I've done my job. I've evoked an emotional response, and I think there's no greater reward for an artist, whether they be visual or musician or a writer, that if you can evoke some sort of emotional response in somebody, I think that's success.
And do you write all the music yourself?
Almost all of it, yes. All the ones on the first were mine. All the ones on the second were mine. The third one, I did include a song that a friend of mine had done. In fact, it's the only song on the CD where I don't write it, I didn't play on it, I didn't sing it, I didn't mix it, I pretty much didn't do anything with it, and she never wanted to put it out. So I said, look, this song is just a stunningly beautiful song, and it speaks to me about a lost love, and I really would love to put it on the CD. And she said, sure, you've done a lot for me, go ahead. And then there's a song on the last song on there is a song that I wrote and I recorded with 3 different singers, but I just never could get the song right. And so I had started playing with a fellow, about a year prior to this, and I was explaining that to him, and he said, well, could I take a crack at it? I said, sure. You can do anything you want to with the song. You don't have to include me. You don't have to have me play on it. He went off, he played all the instruments, he did the singing, he changed some of the song around, and he played it for me one night, and I almost started crying, and I thought, okay, well then, we've succeeded here if he's making me cry with my own lyrics and my own music. And I thought, okay, it's a keeper, so now that's the last song. And the name of the song is It's Not Clear to Me, and it's about, why are we here? I don't understand what's the point. And I don't know. We actually played it for a house concert not too long ago, and people came up to me afterwards and said, that was the best song of the night. And that made me feel really good. And I thought, great, I'm a success.
Yeah, wow. I actually like that it's called It's Not Clear to Me, and you couldn't quite get it right. You needed you needed a little help to get it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and I know one of the questions you asked me in advance was, what would I recommend to younger writers and stuff. And one of the things I had thought about was, don't be too bashful to ask for help. I think that my third CD is so much better than the first two because I have involved many more people. I had help doing some of the recording, certainly singing. I brought in different musicians. And, okay, so I didn't do everything myself. That's not necessary to be a success. And I was explaining to somebody about the fact that this Seven Sides of Self is my first publication, and I know that my second publication will likely be better than the first, and my third will be better than the second because you learn as you go, and certainly been the case with the CD. And by the way, I'll put a plug in for my editor, my wonderful editor Rebecca, and a high school friend of mine, and she's taught me a lot about writing style. Again, asking for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And time for our final break of the podcast. When we come back, I will be asking my usual nosy questions of what do you like to read? What are you reading now? What can I add to my to-be-read list that I'll never get to, but that I still insist on adding to on a regular basis. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with Nancy. We are still talking about her book, Seven Sides of Self, just in case you have not written that name down or have not remembered it. There you go. So let's go ahead and turn now to the conclusion of that interview. So you are a writer, you're a musician, you are an artist. When you take the time to read, do you have favorite genres or authors?
Absolutely. Because I don't have a lot of time to actually sit and read a real book, my county library is just a stone's throw from my house, so I go and I check out books on CDs all the time. So every time I'm driving around, but my favorite authors for years have been pretty much in the science fiction and epic fantasy. Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Frank Herbert, who of course wrote Oliver Dune. My favorite is Ursula K. Le Guin. God rest her soul. And the first person that I absolutely fell in love with was J.R.R. Tolkien. What a shocker. But there's other lesser well-known people. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Zilpha Ketley Snyder, who wrote the Below the Root series. Fascinating. Sort of sci-fi, epic fantasy kind of thing. Mitch Albom, Ian Caldwell. I could go on. And it's such a great thing. Each one let you see the world through a different set of eyes. And I study their writings. I think about the way they write, the way they arrange words to evoke moods. I look at their grammar, and so they've all been wonderful teachers to me. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that with audiobooks, I when I'm not reading for the podcast, then I tend to listen to audiobooks because I do it while I'm commuting or what have you.
Yep.
Which brings up the question, would you ever want your collection of short stories to be an audiobook?
Well, I had a long chat with Jennifer Vance, my publicist, about these sorts of things, and I told her, you know what, I'm willing to spend a little bit of effort and money promoting this book, but I'll tell you what, I'm not going to invest in the big time bucks because, like I said earlier, I think the second collection will be much better than the first, and the third will be better than the second. By the time we get to the third one, then I will be willing to, promote the heck out of it, and I'll probably have more money that I can do that with, and then people, if they're interested, then they can go back and find the other two. But for this particular thing, no, I don't think that, unless my friends want to come and read this for me for free, but no. Yeah, I don't think I'm right. I'm not ready to do that. I'm there'll be a time, but this ain't it, I don't think. Good question though.
Yeah, I'm always curious as to what authors think about that. I know you have a website, I think, right?
Yes.
Mindsites.net. Can you tell people? Oh yes, thank you. I knew that. So your website is I can't even speak. Mindsites.net. How about social media? Can people find you on social media?
Well, I think social media is, to some extent, a generational thing. So the fact that I'm older, this I still have a flip phone. I don't text. Shock, I know. So I have a skeletal Facebook page. I don't really do anything else. Although the music, go to my website, you'll notice that my music's on Bandmix, Bandcamp. I have a YouTube channel for my music. I'm on CD Baby, and I'm on SoundCloud. So those aren't really social media, but I certainly have a presence out there.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that.
I just don't have. Truth be told, I don't have the time.
I know. I understand.
Where's the time? Good Lord. All these people tweeting. Ugh.
Especially when you have all of these different aspects where, you're writing or writing music or playing music or, being just art in general. I feel like, you've got enough on your plate.
Well, the truth of the matter is 75% of my time is spent dealing with family and taking care of mother and brother and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah. There's so many of my friends that are my age that are dealing with this. It's like 6 of my friends all have mothers that are in the same state mine is in. And, we all get together and we trade notes and we, talk about common issues and what do you do about this and what do you do about that. And it's just part of life, That's just the way it is. Nothing you can do about it.
Yes, it is. But it's nice that you have that kind of support.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So we've talked about a lot of different topics. Is there anything, though, that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention about your writing or your music or anything at all?
No, I would just say that if there's somebody that is interested in writing, whether they be young or old or whoever, the thing that did it for me was a neighbor of mine down the street who is this 40-year-old perky, 2.5 kids, a dog, and a white picket fence. I was talking to her one day, and I saw a book on her coffee table, and it had her name on it. And going, what? You're an author? How did this happen? And she told me to go join the Maryland Writers Association, and I did. And maybe there's other states that have such organizations that you can go and join, but they meet once a month. They bring in stunning speakers, and it's actually through one of those speakers that I found She Writes Press, and that's the publisher of my book. And She Writes Press is absolutely a fascinating organization to be affiliated with. If you go to their website, they have all kinds of things for, first it's all for women authors, but they have a online writing university. Then you can sign up for classes and all kinds of tutorials, an annual writers retreat. And Brooke Warner, who is the main publisher, is currently the chairperson for the IBPA, which is the Independent Book Publishers Association. And she is really something, and she has a TED Talk if anybody's interested. So a little promo there for the publisher. We already promoted the publicist, and my editor. So I think I got them all in.
Okay. Actually, that's really interesting. I've had a few authors on the podcast who have been published by She Writes Press, and actually the last interview I did was also an author with She Writes Press. So being well represented.
Yeah, I mean, if you're into the hybrid model, you get all the bells and whistles of a traditional press. The only trick is you as the author have to pay for everything, and it ain't cheap, but it is a means to, as I describe to people, it's a means to build the foundation of a house you hope to build one day. And so this book is my foundation, and the next book will be the walls, and the third book will be the roof, and I'll start building this house, and they've allowed me to do that, and I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Nancy, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about your book. Again, it's called 7 Sides of Self, and I really appreciate you joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you once again to Nancy for joining me to talk about her debut novel, actually, debut collection of short stories, however you would describe that. It's called 7 Sides of Self. There are 7 short stories. All of them have a subtitle that starts with an S. So, in terms of the giveaway, which I mentioned at the beginning, if you would like to be entered into the giveaway to win a copy of 7 Sides of Self, just go to GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and comment on this episode, which is episode 212, of course, interview with Nancy Joie Wilkie. And in the comments, tell me your favorite use of alliteration in a book, whether it's title or subject, or even a quote. Just tell me your favorite use of alliteration in a book. Indulge me in my love of alliteration. Again, that's GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Episode 212, interview with Nancy Joie Wilkie. If you want to be entered into the giveaway, you need to comment. You can also like, share, do all those wonderful things because those really do help us out so much. Another great thing you can do is to subscribe to this podcast. That way you will always be among the first to get the new episodes. And if you are feeling incredibly generous today, could you go ahead and give us a 5-star rating? That would be super awesome. So thank you to you, as always, my readers. Thank you again to Nancy for joining me to talk about these short stories. And I hope that you will join me again on Tuesday when I will be speaking with Andrew Marinis. And I think I just pronounced his last name incorrectly, but I will be finding out soon how to pronounce that. We'll be talking about his book, Games of Deception, the true story of the first U.S. Olympic basketball team at the 1936 Olympics in Hitler's Germany. I am really enjoying the book, and I am looking forward to talking to Andrew about it. So join me for that interview on Tuesday. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend, and hope you have plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts podcast. Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.